Small Business and Startup Stories DSM features conversations with small business owners who share both their victories and failures on their path to success. Small Business and Startup Stories DSM is produced by the Greater Des Moines Partnership. More tips and resources are available at dsmpartnership.com/smallbusiness. I'm your host, Mike Colwell. Stephen Brockshus, welcome to Startup Stories. So FarmlandFinder helps people sell farmland in a very unique and beneficial way. Before your product came to market, tell us what it was like to, quote unquote, sell grandma's farm. Take us through what went on, because there was good and there was bad.
Oh, absolutely, Mike. When you think about farmland traditionally, the person who owned the farm was also the person who was farming the farm. And so usually it was the producer who would, get that ground, or it was a sign on the side of the road that said for sale, or it was selling to the neighbor. And you still drive around the countryside here and you see some of those signs, for sale.
Auction.
Land for auction, land for sale.
Yeah.
And you look at that, just the dynamics of the industry are changing. We're seeing more absentee landowners than ever before, where, the older generation passes away, they give the farm to their kids. And those folks don't live there anymore. They're not farming anymore. They live hours away. And so that's created this really interesting opportunity, and even more interesting opportunity in the future where, less people who own the ground actually live close to the ground.
Yeah.
And in that world, those folks are needing access to, people to help farm it, people to sell their ground to. They need those local connections, that local boots on the ground expertise, but they don't have it because they haven't lived at home for, a decade or longer.
Well, I think a lot of people, I grew up around farms. We owned farms, we didn't live on them. But a lot of people didn't realize how much coercion went on in some of those small farm communities when, Bessie's farm went for sale and Hank passed away 10 years ago, and everybody kind of decided to make sure that the auction went a certain way. Because you had limited bidders, let's face it. The people are going to bid on that land, or the people that lived around it that knew it. And like everything in this world, there are great people and there are some people whose morals I question, to be kind about it. But that was part of the problem. Well, limited market.
It is limited market. I think the other thing that's always a challenge, especially in really hyper-local markets, is those are people you go to church with. Those are people you see every single day that you're going to school with. And I was at an auction one time, where the land was going up for sale. It was absentee landowner said, we're going to bid it because we don't want to have to worry about any of these dynamics. And then the current tenant goes and sits in the front of the room, and no one bids against them because people feel like they're stealing the tenant's land. Technically, it's not. It's the landowner's land, but they're the person who's been farming it forever. And there's all these local dynamics at play that make it really difficult, or kind of create some confusion in those markets. And so it's interesting as you start to where we started about 2.5 years ago, bringing some transparency into the industry, showing people data and numbers, and instead of, I think that land's worth $10,000 an acre. I heard another property sold around that. It creates this market where there's more of a level playing field for people locally who can use data to their advantage, and also people who live far away.
And that was that your original goal when you first started? I mean, because I've known you since right after you started this, and actually the company even had a different name. But when you first started what's now FarmlandFinder, what was your primary goal? What drove you then?
Yeah, really, our mission when we started was to make the world's farmland information accessible. Okay. At that point in time, there was no multiple listing service for agricultural real estate like there is for residential. There's no aggregator sites like Zillow or Trulia. And so we created that. That's what we set out to do. And we've been able to do that really well and do that at scale. We provide coverage across the entire Midwest now. Right. And now we're asking that question, what's the highest and best use for this data? Once you have that together and people have access to it, what interesting things can you do with that? Or how can you alleviate some pain, in the actual transaction process itself? And so that's what we really get excited about for the future.
So take us up to today, how have things changed with the product and with the company?
Yeah, great question. It's the actual mock-ups that I had drawn on a sheet of paper in my notebook, almost 4 or 5 years ago. And the product today looks eerily similar.
Really?
But the business model, the value proposition, how we deliver that to customers, who our customers are, it's been a big learning process.
I think you would be very unique if you didn't say that. I think I hear that every time. It is a learning, and I think that's something entrepreneurs have to understand as you're going to enter a learning process. You think you know, but you don't know. Yeah.
Well, and then you also just see, real life, experiences once you get it in customers' hands, or you start getting actual market feedback that really hones in just the story that there's a narrative that everyone tells themselves about their business.
Right.
And that narrative can hinder you, or it can open up the world of opportunities. And as our narrative has shifted, even though the product has changed, it's improved over time. But the narrative that we tell ourselves and the narrative of where this actually fits in the market, which is different than our initial assumptions were, is a much larger opportunity than we initially set out.
That's a good thing, because sometimes you find out the market's smaller than you. And part of that larger opportunity has been you and your team talking to people that traditionally hadn't been involved in the process. I've been thinking about venture capitalists or private equity people that are the large scale absent landowners, and you've kind of pivoted some of that around or added that into the product as well. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, really, when we look at our product today, there's three sides of it. We have some digital tools for landowners and farmland professionals. One side of that tool set, they can access data about the market, see comparable land sales, what land's selling for, generate automated reports on properties. We feed into some automated valuation models for them. And so those folks are, farmers, landowners, brokers, appraisers, ag lenders, really anyone who touches that buying, selling, valuing of farmland. And then we've got a more hands-on tool. It's called our data management tools, where those private equity farmland investment funds or large ag lending institutions that are analyzing properties at scale, they can input their data into our platform and generate automated reports, automated valuations, and it cuts down really the administrative time just to a couple of clicks. And so it's been exciting to see that over time. And we didn't realize that when we first started. We thought we were going to sell to farmers and landowners because that's who my dad and grandpa were. And they wanted a tool that could do something like this, right? And now as time's gone on, we've seen, hey, there's these more larger B2B sales opportunities on the SaaS side of the business. And that's kind of gotten us up until probably about the last 6 months. And it was back in January of this year, we expanded our footprint of collecting data and making it accessible from 1 state to 12 states across the Midwest. And that's opened up the world of opportunities. It was really interesting. It was back in March or April, just through our customer service channel on our website. We started getting these messages from almost all of them were absentee landowners and saying, hey, we're following your site. We can see really good information. Do you help people sell their ground too? What does that look like? And we didn't. We turned away a lot of folks and passed them off to other clients of ours who do help that. But once we had about a dozen of those come through, we're like, there's something here.
The light bulb went on.
And as we dug in, started asking questions and learning about their pain points. And the story that we heard over and over was, hey, my mom or dad passed away about a year and a half ago. Me and my siblings inherited this property. I was the one that was put in charge of figuring out what to do with it. And
I drew the short straw.
That's exactly. And we don't know where to start because none of those folks live close to the property. They don't have relationships with anyone locally near that property, and they don't want to get taken advantage of.
Well, and they probably don't know much about farming since they left the farm.
No, I mean, our first transaction that had gone through the platform landowner that we had helped, he was a chiropractor in Omaha. Owned farm ground down in south central Iowa, Page County.
Sure.
And so he hadn't hardly been back to the farm. He hasn't helped on the farm, for almost 2 decades. And his dad passed away and he's looking for help. And it's really exciting when we're able to help those folks and get them connected with the buyer and just make it a simple, easy process where they can do it in a self-serve way that they know they're not getting taken advantage of because they have the data, they have the information. That's really rewarding.
I want to touch on something to a side. You mentioned there's these large scale private equity companies that buy up land, and most people in Iowa's picture when they think of that as somebody on the 58th floor of a building in New York City, with a bank of computers in front of them, arbitraging land, and the bad person, the Gordon Gekko of the world. And it's like, I know of 3 of those here in the 2-county area of Story and Polk. There are people here.
Yeah, and
a lot of them are right here with us. There are neighbors that are large-scale investors in farmland.
They are, and they have the same values as your neighbors do, which is really interesting. You know, I grew up on a 5th-generation family farm.
Right.
We've, throughout my entire life, tried to grow our operation. When I was a kid, we were milking 80 cows. When I was in high school, we were milking 300 cows. Today, we're milking 600 cows. The next iteration of the farm, we have to build a new parlor to milk the cows out of. And so for the first time, as in my grandpa's life, as he's been building the operation, he has to stop and ask himself, what type of business are we building? Because we're really turning to that next stage of business. Along with that, you know, my family struggled getting access to farm ground and being able to build up more acres that we can produce more feed for our cattle. But then even right now, in the agricultural economy, you know, times are a little bit tougher. A lot of bankers are telling farmers that you need to decrease debt, which is their nice way of saying you need to sell some ground.
You're over leveraged.
And that's where our family's farm was actually back in January. My dad called and said, hey, we're looking to sell our ground. We're looking for a private investor so we can lease it back. You know, we don't need, you know, all of our neighbors in our business. We're not liquidating. We're not, you know, going out of business. We just need some assistance for this time being.
And it was just a small amount of land. Too,
it's just 60 acres. You know, and that's the story of a lot of farmers that we're hearing. And so it's interesting because in that world, in this future where we are moving towards, you know, the private equity land investment funds, land investors who are willing to buy the farm and rent it back to you can help a lot.
Well, it frees up a ton of capital.
It does. And really that's where, you know, we sit down and, you know, over holidays when we're talking about family business, we ask ourselves, you know, are we in the dairy business? Are we in the real estate business? Because we have a lot of assets, and you know, a lot of money tied up in those assets.
And the answer is yes.
It's like, we're in both right now.
We are.
You know, we go back and forth every holiday of which one are we going to push the lever on moving forward, and what's that mix look like? But the reality is the future of farming, the future of, you know, the agricultural real estate asset class, it's just going to look a little bit different and have different people playing in this space. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for everyone who engages with it.
Well, let's face it. When I was, you know, 50 years ago, when I was a boy, the average farmer was farming 160 to 250 acres, right? 160, 240, maybe 320. That was about as much as you could handle. I have a friend whose family's been farming 5-6 generations, and they own 20,000. They farm 10,000 more. They do it with like 5 people.
Yeah.
I mean, the dynamic has changed. It isn't the farm that it used to be.
Absolutely. Well, and they operate, you know, farms have always been businesses. My grandma always says, you know, farming's more than a business, it's a way of life. And that's really, really true. And what's interesting as you get further and further down the road into the future, if you want to maintain that way of life, you need to operate it like a business.
Yeah.
Right. And so they go hand in hand, and they're really, in my home county, Osceola County, Northwest Iowa, you know, the biggest businesses in the entire county are farms.
Oh, of course they are. Farms and the co-ops that support them.
Exactly. And it's interesting because a lot of people just don't think about it like that. But these are, you know, families, these are businesses, these are folks that want to get started and grow and care for the land and produce food. And it's not, you know, a little red barn and, you know, some cows frolicking in the pasture and this.
No, when you say build a parlor, we're not talking about an 800 square foot front room. Or 200 square foot front room.
And we do milk our barn. It's interesting. So it's over 100 years old. Yeah. We've renovated it in my lifetime at least 3 times. So probably more than that. And we're milking as many cows out of it as we can. And I know my grandpa, who's getting closer to that retirement age, I think he'd be hard pressed to see us not milking that barn while he's still there. But I know my dad and uncle are really itching at the bit and saying, all right, what does it look like for that next generation, you know, to grow this and build the business even more. So it's exciting, and there's a lot of opportunity in ag for folks that can understand the business of it. Yeah.
So if we go all the way back to the beginning, it sounds like this is an idea you were worked on or was in your head for a long time. When did you first really start thinking about this?
That's a great question. I journal a lot and put ideas in a notebook. And I think it was a post I put in my notebook of January 2015. Okay. Is it 2015 or 2014?
So 5 years ago, roughly?
Yeah, roughly. And what was interesting at that point in time, I was just brainstorming, hey, what are either technologies I think ag could use, or what are pain points and problems that I've experienced personally or my family experiences? And it was just one little bullet point out of dozens, you know, on a lot of things. But there's been some monumental, very influential moments have been kind of seeds that have influenced what is now FarmlandFinder. One of them was the experience just back in January with my dad saying, "Hey, we've got to find
of course,
someone to sell some ground." That's pretty monumental. I remember when I was a kid, like I mentioned, our dairy was growing. We're trying to find more acres, and I remember one time that my dad came home. He was really frustrated because our neighbor's property had sold. And we didn't even know that it was selling.
Yeah.
And he was frustrated just because land doesn't come up for sale that often, and you want to be able to have bat if there's an opportunity.
Right.
So I know that was really frustrating.
So were you at Iowa State when you first started working on this? You were in college, weren't you?
I was. Yeah, I was at Iowa State, and it was my junior year. I had interned. So I took a year off of college. I was a national FFA officer, Future Farmers of America. Yeah. And during that year, I got to travel around the country meeting with agricultural education students and teachers and doing visits with FFA Foundation and raising money. And when I was doing some visits with, they call it individual giving, so high net worth individuals, most of those folks had either ran businesses or started businesses of their own.
Yeah.
And that's what turned me on to entrepreneurship. The mindset that a lot of these people had, and people I respect and really looked up to, is they felt that the values that they have and the way they see the world and the passions, they're able to channel that through a business and create the biggest impact possible. A lot of people were very driven on, this is how I can have the biggest influence in the world, is by creating a business and having a successful business. And so that kind of gave me a little bit of an itch of it. I came back to Iowa State that next semester, walked into the College of Ag. There was a poster that said Ag Entrepreneurship Initiative. I didn't really know what entrepreneurship was, but I'm like, I think that's like business ownership. And so I walk in to the office and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for an internship. I want an internship where I work side by side with the owner of a business." And that was March of 2015. She said, "Well, it's March. You're a little late to get an internship for the summer, but I'll see what I can find." And there ended up being one founder who had an internship position open through the Ag Entrepreneurship Initiative program. Interned with him for the summer. Learned all about market research and validating processes and what's an MVP, and got to learn.
Was that a startup, or were they farther down the road?
It was a startup, very early stage startup, and I got to learn without having any of the risk myself, and I got paid. I was an intern. It was pretty great.
Paid internship.
It was
even
good.
better.
Yeah. And then I got back to Iowa State that next semester. Took Kevin Kimley's Econ 334.
Did that put you into the Ag Startup Engine, or was that around then?
So that happened maybe a year or two after that.
Okay.
So that put me on the pipeline. So it's really interesting. So at the College of Ag and Kevin Kimley and
Kevin's kind of the center of the College of Ag entrepreneurial world.
He really is. He's an interesting person. A lot of people don't realize this, but he's had 2 successful startups himself, successfully exited. And I have a really strong thesis that in order for the Iowa startup environment or ecosystem or whatever you want to call it, the best way that any one of us founders can really make a big difference in it is to be as wildly successful as we can. Because then that gives us the ability to give back in a lot of knowledge ways, a lot of financial ways, a lot of mentorship ways. And that's exactly what Kevin Kimley's doing and what he's done.
And you're not unique in that. That's exactly what Brad Feld says in startup communities is you create the ecosystem. He calls them leaders and feeders. And feeders not a negative. Feeders the people that feed the environment, which is something I do. Leaders are the people that have built the companies or are building the companies. They have to take the lead in the ecosystem. It's a fundamental of his, and he's proven it right in Boulder and around the world with Techstars. So was ISU supportive of your venture?
Yeah, very supportive. Kevin had to keep me in school long enough to graduate, which is the battle that he always...
And your parents were pleased? Were they paying him off on the side to keep you in?
Yeah, parents were pleased. That's good. But it was really great because it was the summer of... It was actually when I was interning with that other startup, kind of the last pivotal moment that really solidified this problem space. I was at a farmland auction, actually with my dad, back up in the home area. And as I looked around the room, the auctioneer up at the front, he had printed off a picture of the farm he had taken on his phone from the side of the road. And that was really the only bit of data that was available. And there's nothing about how does it sit in the current market? How does it benchmark against others? What's
one picture from the side of the road with a cell phone?
Yeah, and it's almost $2 million farm. It's just in a world where data and information's at your fingertips. It's interesting that that information is just not available in the farmland space. And so that's what we set out to do. I started working through what I would say business model, iterating, customer validation through Kevin Kimley's class that year.
Right.
Participated in venture school actually the next year through the University of Iowa.
Right.
And the way I got into that actually was through a startup weekend. So it's all these startup events that, around, we ended up winning a startup weekend, that year, and the winning team, automatically got accepted to venture school. So went through venture school, was kind of playing around with the idea and seeing what this could be. And then it was through the Iowa Economic Development Authority. We had a couple of paid customers. We were able to get the proof of commercial relevance funds. And really push things forward from there. And then I got to this point in my college career where I was studying agricultural education. I had a minor in entrepreneurial studies. I had to decide if I was going to student teach or not.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who I get very, when I focus on something, I get very dedicated to it. And
you have good focus.
I don't know if my family calls it stubborn, but
that's another word for
focus is, I really appreciate that. But I had to sit down with my Dr. Vitalik, my advisor, and sit down and see what am I going to do my last semester? Am I going to student teach or not? And I knew I couldn't do both and give them the attention that they needed and required. Right. And I wouldn't be able to do it. And so decided, well, at that point in time, this business opportunity had come, and I felt like that's what the opportunity I had to take. And so really started running with that. Graduated college, that next semester, and have been full-time on it ever since.
Sure. So we talked about some of the key people from ISU that you look to for support. You're now mentoring at ISU. In fact, I think you mentor in the SciStarters program. Do you ever see yourself like a 4 or 5 year younger version of yourself in these people you're talking to?
I feel
hear yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and you might appreciate this, having been through the cycles of a career longer than I have, is I feel like I've learned a heck of a lot. And when I think back when I was at Iowa State or in the Ag EI program or at SciStarters, man, that was a very different, place and iteration and version of Stephen, and his understanding. And, but then I feel like today, we're just getting started, and we've come a long ways. So it's really fun to be able to.
That feeling doesn't go away. I remember sitting there staring at our company was going to do, I want to say somewhere between 950 million and $1 billion for revenue.
Yeah.
And as the head of marketing, I'm sitting there going, how do I grow that 15% next year? It's like, oh man, we're just getting started on this. We got to grow a lot. So it doesn't go away.
Oh, and there's excitement that comes with that.
There is.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to go. I was actually back at Iowa State a week or two ago, and there's this group, I think it's through the College of Business and the College of Ag, kind of a partnership called the Changemakers Academy. So a lot of students that participate in those types of programs that the university offers. So they came in, and all of them were given a list of words, random words, and they had to put together a business pitch, kind of based off of Techstars pitch format. And so for 45 minutes, they had to iterate, and they had to come up with the problem, the solution, the value prop, what the model was, do some initial market research. And they told me I was the Simon Cowell of the panel. So I was supposed to listen and give my honest feedback. And so it's just fun to participate.
For me, who doesn't watch that show, what is it about Simon?
So he's someone who, if he loves you, he'll tell you that he loves you. If he doesn't, he's pretty just direct. But even if he does love you, he's got a shtick to him where he's just tells you honestly, hey, this is what I think of it. It was just so exciting because these students, they're just getting started. And the question, and really in college, for a lot of the students is, well, what career am I going to go into, and what does that look like? And there's a lot of, especially in Iowa, in ag, there's some really incredible, world-class internships that you can participate in.
Yes, within 50 miles of the campus, you can.
Oh, it's crazy.
Touch most of the ag world.
It's incredible. In the same token, if you're going to be starting a business that touches the ag world, there's an incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise and networks right here in central Iowa. And so part of this Changemakers Academy is to get these students to think, hey, what could it look like to be innovative? What could it look like to start your own business? And so I love getting the chance to go back and share with those students, because that's where I was. And I wish there was more programs that I could plug into.
You don't have the time anymore.
And now literally, and that's where you talk about community events. And I think it's interesting. I've got friends who, help run 1 million cups in the area and do other things. And, my head, especially for the past 12 months, has been nose to the grindstone down, building.
The company.
And at some point in time, you'll be able to bring head up and start plugging into some of these things. I do where I can really provide value as well.
You'll probably find, like most of the people that are in the growth mode, is you pick one or two things you're passionate about and say, I'm going to focus here. I know a couple entrepreneurs in the area who have written posts on their public blog saying, these are the two things I'm going to focus on. I've got to run my business, but I'm going to do these two. And that's all right.
Yeah, that's great.
So speaking of early stage, when did you first raise money and how much did you raise, if you wouldn't mind saying?
Yeah, so we raised, it's about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
We call it an angel round. We raised $265,000 in convertible debt. Okay. And through some state loans and programs, we about matched that with, economic development loans as well. And so about $500,000 round of capital.
So what was that experience like for you the first time you did that?
It's like hitting your head against the wall. So for the first 6 months of attempting to raise capital and not doing it very well, I realized I was targeting the wrong group of people entirely. And I didn't realize that. I tried to ask people and learn as well as quickly as I could. I thought, hey, we're touching farmland that's, got a lot of high net worth individuals touching that asset class, investing in it. Right. Let's go talk to a bunch of our clients who are farmland owners. It comes to turn out, they're not looking at multiples of returns of revenue. They're looking at percents of returns revenue and just the profile of and risk tolerance for their investment. It's just a completely different world than, high risk, startup investing.
Totally different profile.
Very different. And so once we shifted, realized, okay, we're targeting the wrong people, started really finding success leaning into my network. Asking for introductions, asking for referrals, which I thought I was doing that before, but realized I wasn't really asking for people to help point me in the right direction. And then we were able to move fairly quickly. About half of our angels that invested were actually clients of mine. Nice. People who believe in what we're doing, they're using the product, they see the potential for it. That was one really good relationship building, really good validation. That here's some of the best in the industry, believe in what we're doing and want to invest. And then the other half came from referrals from people who said, hey, Steven's onto something. I can vouch for him. You're really smart. You've built several businesses and invested in successful businesses. Check it out. And so, it's interesting because it just takes one person, one referral to really get things moving.
I have seen a single referral take through their subsequent. So one person referred someone and that person that was referred in brings their friends and suddenly they fill 80% of the round.
Yeah.
And one call. Yeah. It's figuring out which one's the one call. So going back to your product, one of the most intriguing aspects that I find is the ability of a seller of a property to receive a certified cash offer for their land in a matter of days. Tell us more about this.
Yeah. When we look at some of those pain points that those absentee landowners shared with us, one, they struggle knowing what the actual value of their property is.
Sure.
Two, from a handful, there's this sense that if they're reaching out to a consultant or a broker or an auctioneer, it feels like, their objective is to help make the ground sell. But they're missing some of this consultative advice, or they don't have really true third-party unbiased resource of information to, for a second opinion. And so in that process, it's on average today, it takes 90 days for a property to sell, and then it takes about 45 days for the property to close. And so it can be a long transaction cycle. And for these landowners who don't understand that, they don't touch it. They just want, hey, I want to sell. I've made the decision. Let's make it as easy as possible. Yeah. Those are the folks that we can help. And so this offers program, what we do is we built up this network and have a growing network of buyers who have shared through our platform a profile of what they're looking for, what criteria of land, the profile. They've shared how much capital they have ready to deploy, how quickly they can do that, what their process is. And since we have that sitting in the hopper, when someone comes through and requests an offer, we're able to leverage all this data we've gathered to put together an automated packet, make connections between the matches. And now the seller of that ground has access, a level playing field to discuss price and valuation is what these really sophisticated investors do, because we have all this data and information, and we can make those connections happen quickly and get to close as fast as possible.
So what is a fast close?
So for us, we take that 90 days average listing. Our quickest has been 3 days. Yeah. So cut that down drastically. And then the closing process, we're still working through that and bringing on some additional team members to refine. And how do we cut that 45-day process down when you have to work with lenders and appraisers and other folks? We're working with and having conversations with some really interesting players in that space to see what partnerships and strategic partnerships might be available to help streamline that part of the process. But we feel really solid about, like I said, the first half, and now we're kind of chipping away at the second half.
Well, so if you can almost virtually eliminate the first half, the first 90 days, the second 45 doesn't look so bad, but I can see why you'd want to bring it in lower. Mm-hmm. So that really does take away the whole thing you were talking about with the earlier auction, where the current tenant sits at the front and they're the only bidder, because really it puts it out there. It does. And what we learned too when we watch auctions, it's fun to go sit in a room, go and do it if you haven't, is on average, you'll have about 5 or 6 people bidding on a property. Once it gets to about half of the value or 2/3 of the value that will actually sell for, it gets down to 2, maybe 3 bidders. Right.
And so our objective at FarmlandFinder, there's 2 sides of it. It's one, we don't have to get it in front of the broadest audience possible. We just need to get it in front of the right 6 people possible.
Absolutely. 6 would be wonderful in a lot of cases. Yeah.
And when you look at that, that's something that through technology and through just having a deep and rich understanding of, 1, the profile of land, and 2, the profile of these buyers, we're able to make those connections really quickly. So
you grew up on a farm. A dairy farm, which is probably one of the hardest kinds of farm to work, because you work 7 days a week.
That's what they tell me.
20 hours a day. Or I think you get 4 hours of sleep. I can't remember. What was that like, and how did it prepare you, or did it prepare you for running a company?
That's a great question. So one phrase my grandpa always says is, cows got to be milked. It doesn't matter if it's rain and shine, if you want to, if you're sick, if you're not. At the end of the day, cows got to be milked. And when you're running a business, there's a lot of things that you really enjoy, that you love doing. And for me, it's the strategy, it's the relationship building, it's setting the vision and motivating people. There's things that you don't enjoy doing, like the books and accounting and logging everything and, the tiny details. But cows got to be milked. And so there's just a lot of lessons, that growing up on the farm that are very alike to having your own business. Other thing is, it's not a regular, 9 to 5 work day. And it comes and goes. And back to my grandma said, it's a way of life. The reason that entrepreneurship is also partially a way of life is because it's almost has to be in order for you to make that business succeed. It'd be really hard pressed, or I haven't figured out how to, at this point in building the business, just start at 9, get done at 5, and start to make it happen, because there's a lot that happens at all hours of the day that need to be done.
Well, and it's funny, because there was that 9 to 5 world, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago when I was first coming out of college. I think for most people, even in the people that I work with here at the partnership, you can say we show up at 8:30 and go home at 5, but I can tell you a whole bunch of people that are on their email in the evening or in the morning. And, part of it's flexing your schedule, but part of it is that's just the world we're in. It moves faster now.
Well, it is. And I think it's also, and one thing I really get excited about, because it can sound pretty drab if you're like, oh, you're going to be working all the time and this and that. Well, the other thing is, if your passions and values and interests are so aligned with what you're doing,
it's fun.
Then it is a joy and it is fun, and you're able to fit in. I'm able to do really incredible things because of the flexibility of the schedule, but still get the deliverables and work done that needs to happen. Right. And so it's just, what type of life do you want to live, and how do you build a career that, has the impact that you want and gives you the life that you want. And so it's a fun thing that's not easy to figure out. And you go through a lot of seasons, like right now, primarily, or historically, I've been, working out of co-working spaces and working out of home. And we're going to be scaling up the team quite a bit here over the winter. And so we'll be moving into the office, and Steven's daily workflow is going to be looking a little bit different. And that's all exciting. It's all the seasons of life and change that as you progress through life cycles of business.
So I assume your parents were entrepreneurial, trying new things and failing. What did that teach you about failure?
Yeah, well, my dad is a farmer. My mom is a school teacher, high school art education. And so any creativity that I have, definitely attribute that to my mom. And
your father won't like that.
Yeah, well, and he's not going to like that. I say, I get the stubborn nature, the hardworking nature, the focused nature from him. But it's interesting because my entire family and generations family, for the most part, are up on the farm in Northwest Iowa, right. Working to build that business, and they love it. And so the lessons that you learn, as someone is doing what they love and willing to do things or have a tolerance for risk or for disappointment or setbacks, and then also tolerance to really work through those. It just builds these traits in you over time that so when I'm mentoring these kids, these students, at Sci Starters or at Iowa State,
they do look like kids a few years later, don't they?
The students,
yeah. No, it's cool. Believe me. I'm 58. They really look like kids to me.
But what's great is, there's some people who they just have the traits that, they're going to find success no matter what they're doing in their life. And those are the types of traits that you have to be an entrepreneur and really be able to build a highly scalable business.
Yeah. So what's next for FarmlandFinder?
Yeah, great question. One, in a very practical sense, a lot of growth. From a really big picture sense, our mission now, it's not to make the world's farmland information accessible, but it's to make farmland sales simple, instant, and online. And we see us in this platform and the data and the network effects that are starting to be built to have potential be a category-winning business and fundamentally change how people interact with agricultural real estate as an asset class. And so what's next is we'll be pursuing unrelentlessly until farmland sales literally are simple and instant, where you pull up your phone, click buy now, and the deed is transferred to your name. It should be done in a couple of clicks, and that's what we're pushing towards.
Makes perfect sense. Well, Stephen Brockshus, thank you for being on Startup Stories.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Small Business and Startup Stories DSM podcast. Inspired by these stories, we offer a hub full of resources needed for any small business owner to grow and succeed in Greater Des Moines, Iowa at dsmpartnership.com/smallbusiness. Thanks for listening.